Hello, thank you for joining me. This is Under Orange. Today I want to show you a fun holiday sweater that I decided to put together kind of on a whim. Actually, I had planned to do the Halloween sweater that I had sort of teased in a previous video, but I was told that it's not seasonal. So I did this one instead, and of course I have problems doing things the same way twice, so I did it very, very differently than the other one. I'll definitely post the other one eventually, but without further ado, here is a Christmas flamingo sweater. I mean, can you blame me though? Look at that little flamingo. He is just so cute. I decided to challenge myself this time, and instead of doing how I'd previously done, which involved using both socks, I thought since these were knee-highs, I would see if I can get a Smartdoll size sweater out of just one sock, so that I'd have an extra sock left over. And with that in mind, I knew it was going to be a little bit tighter around the middle, but I figured I'd go for it. First thing I need to do is cut out the body of the sweater, which is of course going to be the big flamingo because he's just too cute. And then I try it on the doll. Off screen, sorry about that. But there she is, so you can see it fits around her, and we're gonna go with it. I know I need diagonal cuts, but because of the placement of the flamingo's head, they couldn't be super diagonal. So I got it as close to his little beak as I could, while of course keeping the seam allowance. I keep measuring to kind of keep in mind the neck width. You can play around with that some, but I always want to make sure it's close. And now for the rest of the sock, we need the sleeves. So we measured the length of the sleeves, which they did end up a little bit long, and I revised my numbers later because of it. But for now, cut it out. And I've decided that half of the sock is going to be enough width for each arm. So I'm cutting it basically in half. And you will note there is the heel to deal with. I just sew that down, honestly. I try to keep everything as even as possible and just sew it down. You'll see later. Now you can see me trying to fiddle and get the diagonals on the sleeves, because the style of sweater is actually a raglan sweater. I think that's how you pronounce it. Oh my gosh, it's a word I've only ever seen written down. But the kind with the sleeves go all the way up to the neck, basically. And they are honestly the easiest to make sweaters out of, at least sock sweaters for dolls that I've noticed. And they tend to look really good, I think. I was just kind of comparing them, making sure they look right. And now you see me fiddling around with that heel to try and get rid of it. You can see the pattern lines up nicely when you do, so we should just be able to sew that down. And you see, I am experimenting. I tried to do a little bit more with, so you can actually see me sewing things. I definitely need to work on the angle. We'll work on that in next videos. I do not have the equipment yet. Right now it was actually sitting on its own case. Not really the most sophisticated setup. But you can see I'm threading my needles. I do use twin needles with knits. I think they make nice stretchy seams, and I really prefer them. And you can also see I have a walking foot. They're also really excellent for knits, even if getting it set up is a little tricky. I had a false start there. My thread wasn't threading nicely, so of course then you get to thread it all over again. Hopefully fix the problem. Round 2 seems to have worked out alright. One thing I've noticed with my walking foot is that things will always get caught about an inch in, and I have to pull it up and straighten them and then keep going. I don't know if it's specific to my walking foot or if it's just a thing that walking foots do. It's not so bad though. I had considered using this part as cuffs for the sleeves, but I ended up realizing that I had cut it just a little bit too thin and I didn't really feel like fighting with it, and I ended up just folding them over instead. You can see me kind of figuring that out here, like, oh, well, this isn't worth it, so I just folded it over. One of the things I like about stripes is that it helps me keep things even without having to pin them. Because I don't like pinning things. I know, it's useful, and you should do it, but And then we're gonna sew the sleeves together. And the reason I'm sewing them together instead of onto the body is because of the order in which I have to sew it, because there's not a side seam on the body. So you kind of have to make changes based on that. Normally with doll clothes, I'll put the sleeves on first and then sew the side seam and the sleeve at the same time. In this case, it just didn't work out because there was no side seam. There you can see me cutting off all the extra fabric from the heels because we just don't need that floating around in there. And we sew down the second seam. You will notice that every now and then I pick up a pin to keep things straight, and that is definitely a trick I picked up, especially doing dolls with their tiny, tiny seam allowances. And now we gotta flip our sleeves out right side out, trim down all the icky seams that always seem to look so gross from the outside. And now you can see I'm trying to figure out how I want to use the top of the sock, because I love using the tops of the socks as like the top of the, you know, the collar for the sweater or for the bottom of it. In this case, I wanted to use it for both. So instead of keeping it as is, I cut it so that you can find out the true width, and then I end up cutting it almost in half. The collar piece is definitely a little bit narrower than the bottom piece. And here I'm just pinning the bottom piece onto the sweater. The bottom piece is just a little bit skinnier than the actual sock, which I'm sure you've noticed with your own socks. When you run it through the machine, you want to, as much as possible, stretch the bottom piece while keeping the actual body of the sweater as unstretched as you can, Because if it goes through the machine stretched out, it's gonna look stretched out. I'm only sometimes successful at this. It definitely takes practice. And now we're going to inset the sleeves. So you want the sleeve to be right side out and the sweater to be inside out so that you've got your right sides facing. Try not to run your pins through your machine. I know you can, and sometimes it's not tragic, but I've definitely broken a needle on a pin and it almost hit my eye, and that was terrifying, and I don't want anybody to get hurt. So unless you're gonna wear goggles, just take the pin out before it goes under the needle. It's the safest way. And there you can see it's connected. So we're going to do exactly the same thing with the other sleeve. And now all it needs is a collar, which we have one. And one of the things I've noticed tends to look the best is if I stretch the collar out a little bit to fit over a wider area than the actual collar is. It kind of pulls it in a little bit. You can overdo that and make it look puckery, but normally if you do it just a little bit, it tends to make the collar lay much nicer. And just because of how the numbers worked out, I didn't actually need to cut down the piece of sock, which was kind of nice. So I just tried to evenly distribute all of the sweater material across the collar. And it's a bit finicky because my collar did end up extremely narrow, so I tend to fidget with it a little bit more just to make sure it goes through right the first time. One of the things about the twin needles is, oh boy, picking those seams is not very fun. And there it is. It looks a little weird. We're gonna see how it fits the doll. And it actually fits really cute. I was so happy with how this one turned out. I love the pattern. I love the cute style of it. It ended up a little bit more form-fitting and kind of fun. Definitely a huge success in the end. Also, please excuse my yarn. I'm sorry about that. and just a few stills to kind of check her out. I just wanted to say thank you so much again for joining me. Had a lot of fun with this project, and I hope you stick around to see more coming. Please hit that like and subscribe if you want to see it. Make sure you catch it when it drops.